Seven blessings on you, and welcome back to the Waiting for Winter podcast. I'm your host, Fraser of House Robinson, joined by my co-host, Kira of House Oldfield.
Hello.
Hello. We are very pleased to announce, actually, that as of now, the show is available on both YouTube and iTunes. So, if that's your preferred method of listening to podcasts, that's where you can get it now. You can find links to both storefronts on our Facebook page and on our Twitter.
Wonderful.
Yeah, it's an exciting development. I'm very keen about that. So that's some good news. Also, I have an apology to make based on last episode. We accidentally skipped a scene. I don't know if you realise this, Kira. There's a scene in episode 1 that we skipped over where Ned is sitting in the Godswood and Kat comes with the news that John Arryn has died. So apologies.
We did miss
to our
that.
listeners. Apologies to our listeners for that little mistake. Although I don't think anybody really noticed because we got zero feedback about it. So
Then again, how many people actually listened to the first podcast?
well, the SoundCloud has 12 plays at this point. So
Exciting.
somebody must be out there. Anyway, without any further ado, let us now start our next set of recaps, beginning with I just about did it again. Episode 3 of Season 1, entitled Lord Snow. I almost did it.
You almost did it.
What listeners probably don't know is that we had a first shot at recording this where I accidentally said Episode 1 of Season 3, so I'm glad that I avoided that particular pothole this time.
It was actually the other way around as well. You were like, Season 1 episode... No, it was Season 3 episode 1.
Anyway, without wishing to make too much of that, I'm just glad I managed to avoid that this time.
Yep.
So we start off our episode with King's Landing, and the royal party, which has travelled many long miles from Winterfell, is arriving at the capital, and Ned and his retinue ride into the castle courtyard, and they're met by a messenger who wants to bring Ned to the small council meeting that is currently in progress. And we have this absolutely brilliant moment of the messenger saying, "If perhaps you'd like to change into something," and Ned just gives him a look.
Just be like, no.
Like, I imagine it's a look that Ned reserves for people who have said something just incredibly boneheaded, but it just stops this guy right in his tracks.
Yep.
It's quite funny. Ned is taken through the throne room where he runs into Jaime Lannister, and they have a bit of a talk about the day that the Mad King murdered Ned's father and brother. And we have this moment of Jaime kind of trying to rationalise his killing of the Mad King.
Yeah.
Like, he talks about how killing the Mad King felt like justice for Ned's father and brother, but Ned isn't buying that, not for a second.
No.
He
he
says, well, yes, you served him when serving was safe, and it's a sort of another moment of tension between Ned and Jaime.
And it's an interesting idea about, like, he was sworn to that king, and yes, that king was insane, but you were sworn to that king, so how does that work?
Yeah, there's a later scene. There's a scene in season 3, I think, where Jaime goes through a similar conversation with Kat.
Yeah.
Like, honour the king and protect the king, obey your father. But what if your father hates the king? What if the king commands you to kill your father? Things like that. So
yeah,
I think it's one of the dimensions of Jaime's character that I especially like. This sort of idea of him being torn between conflicting oaths. So Ned is taken to the small council chamber where we meet Varys, Renly, Grandmaster Pycelle, and Littlefinger for the first time, and they have a bit of idle chit chat before the meeting starts properly, and we get a little tantalising hint of Littlefinger's supposed history with the Stark family, namely Ned's brother Brandon and Ned's wife.
Yeah.
Specifically in the form of a duel that Littlefinger fought Brandon before Cat was supposed to marry him because Littlefinger wanted to marry her.
Yeah, he still has a total crush on her. It's so obvious.
Definitely. It's almost kind of that sort of, I guess, subversion of the fairy tale narrative that
Yeah.
George R. R. Martin likes to do so often, where like the smaller, weaker protagonist fights the big tough guy for the girl and he wins. But in this case, Littlefinger undeniably lost.
Oh yeah. There's no underdog character here.
So the meeting progresses, and Littlefinger, while they're discussing the organisation of a tournament to celebrate Ned's appointment as Hand of the King, Littlefinger reveals that the crown is horrendously in debt.
6 million! 6 million in debt. That's a lot.
6 million gold dragons. I might be misremembering this, but I think I found an app once that converted fantasy currency into real currency, and I think the average gold dragon was about $100 at the time, which I might be misremembering, but it's a not insignificant amount of money.
That's a lot.
So, yeah, they reveal that the crown is horrendously in debt, about half of which is owed to Tywin Lannister, some 3 million dragons, and Ned is getting a bit shirty because he's confused as to how Robert and Jon Arryn could have just mismanaged the crown finances so badly.
Yeah.
And of course, we don't really find this out in the show, but in the books it's very strongly alluded to that Littlefinger has just been aggressively embezzling from the crown.
Oh yeah.
During his time as Master of Coin.
I like that. I like that phrase, aggressively embezzling.
So most of the debt is apparently money that Littlefinger has borrowed in order to line his own pockets with. So, that's fun. In the royal chambers, Cersei is dressing Joffrey's wounds from the encounter with the direwolves at Darry. Well, direwolves singular rather.
Yeah.
And they have a chat about the incident and how to best handle the Starks. And Joffrey sort of shows his inexperience by talking about how he would raise an army and take Winterfell and install someone loyal to rule over the north. Which, yeah, Cersei just slaps him right down with that. Like, she is completely unambiguous about the fact that is a stupid plan.
Yeah.
And it is a stupid plan.
It's definitely a stupid plan. You need to be smarter than that.
We get a very cool line out of this scene where Cersei says the North can't be ruled, not by an outsider. It's too big and too wild, which is something I thought about. I think in season 6, where Cersei sends Littlefinger to take Winterfell back from the rebellious Jon Snow. So it's an interesting sentiment that she seems to stand by in later seasons. In Ned's chambers in the castle, the Stark sisters are bickering about what happened at Darry, and Arya expresses her desire to murder Joffrey, which is, a healthy thing for a young girl to want to do. And I'm reminded of a bit in the books where this scene happens, and Sansa is talking about how great it will be to be married to Joffrey and how everything will be lovely, and how Arya will have to call her Your Grace, causing Arya to just throw an orange straight at Sansa with something along the lines of, well, here's your breakfast, Your Grace, and just with the orange, which is just like a fun sort of sibling rivalry scene.
Yeah,
I thought was nice.
I was reminded that in the show, this was the first scene that Sophie Turner did, and she was and Maisie stabbed the table so hard that she left a dent, and they had to like reposition the shot to make sure that the dent wasn't still in the table and they couldn't see it.
Maisie Williams with the method acting.
Method acting, yeah.
Arya goes storming out of the room, and Ned comes in, tries to break up the tension, and he presents Sansa with a doll that was made by the same toy maker that makes Marcella's toys, and Sansa is not impressed by this, being, as she says, too old for dolls.
Yeah. Which
I think Ned is a bit sort of put out by. And he has this line in that scene: "War was easier than daughters," which it's an interesting line, but
war is straightforward.
One that I imagine he feels quite deeply, given what's just happened.
Yeah, you hit the people in the head and they die, or they don't die, and if they don't die, you hit them in the head again. Whereas this requires more subtlety, I feel.
I think I've read that in a book, yeah. So in Arya's bedroom, Ned finds Arya playing with needle, which he didn't realise she had up until this point, and realises that it was made by the blacksmith at Winterfell.
Yep.
And Arya expresses her anger at Cersei and Joffrey and the Hound and Sansa, and Ned has this sort of moment of like fatherly dotage where he talks about how Arya and Sansa have to sort of look out for each other while they're in King's Landing, because there's a lot of potential dangers around, and how really the whole family needs to be on the lookout for things like that. And it's a very sort of gloomy scene, but at the same time it's kind of sweet, like the way Ned is kind of being a dad.
Definitely the supportive father figure.
Yeah. To lighten up the tone a wee bit, Ned gives allusions to the fact that he might get Arya sword fighting lessons, so that she can properly learn how to use her sword. We cut to Winterfell now, and old Nan is trying to entertain the still bedridden Bran with various stories, and Bran sort of expresses a desire to hear more of the scary stories, and old Nan says, I think what might be one of the most iconic lines in the entire show, "Oh, my sweet summer child, what do you know about fear?" Which is quite a strong motif throughout the series, I think. This idea that people who are born and raised in the sort of less harsh conditions would just be completely unprepared for what is to come. It's something that Kat herself, I think, expresses in season 2 when talking about the army of Renly Baratheon, and it's something that crops up quite a lot. So Robb comes into the room, and he and Bran talk about Bran's injury, and at this point Bran expresses a feeling that he would rather be dead than crippled, which naturally Robb reacts rather alarmed to that.
It's quite a big thing for a small child to say that he would rather be dead.
It's a natural reaction from Robb, definitely. And so they and of course I think Bran is also a little bit upset that his mother had to leave, which is something I think that gets expressed. I think in the next episode, I think there's a bit where Bran talks about how he's sad that his mother has gone away, but it's something that comes up quite a bit.
Yeah.
So we cut to King's Landing, and Cat and Sir Roderick Cassel are arriving in the city. Despite trying to be incognito, they are immediately intercepted by 2 city watchmen who address Cat by name. So, the incognito thing goes right out the window.
Yeah, nobody walks into a city with their scarf around their head in the middle of summer unless they're trying not to be noticed, and in which case makes them noticeable.
It's like you see someone on the street wearing like a large trench coat and dark glasses, and you immediately think that person's up to no good. So the Watchmen take Cat and Roderick to Littlefinger, or more accurately to one of the brothels that he owns in the city.
Yep.
And Cat is rather angry about being dragged to a brothel, as you might imagine. And I think the phrase she uses exactly is treating me like some sort of back alley Sally, which is
it's a very modern phrase.
As like a way to describe a prostitute. I might see how one reacts to that if I just ever happen to meet one. I'd be like, how would you feel about being called a back alley Sally? Sounds like a Little Richard song, actually.
I think their level of, or their sense of humour would be entirely dependent.
So Littlefinger reveals that Varys knew that Cat was coming, and they have a bit of a talk about why Cat is in the city, and Cat shows Varys and Littlefinger the dagger that was used to try and murder Bran, and Littlefinger reveals that it used to belong to him until he lost it on a bet to Tyrion, which is not actually true. So Littlefinger once again
very much a lie.
Yep, showing himself to be completely and utterly untrustworthy. I'd like to point out something at this moment. Aidan Gillen's accent is very English in these early seasons, but in the later seasons, season 7, 6 and 7 especially, he's quite pronounced in his Irish accent. Like, he puts the very strong sort of lilt on a lot of the words that he didn't used to, and then in these early seasons his voice is quite sort of King's English, which is it's an interesting Interesting disparity.
Yeah, it's very clipped in the beginning,
Mm.
and then it just
I think
chills out. Maybe that's because he's not trying to pretend anymore. He's just given up.
Although I kind of think the sort of the clippedness suits the character of Littlefinger better. I might be just being a stick in the mud on that, but incidentally, Mr. Gillen, if you are listening to the show, we'd very much like to hear your explanation for this change in accent, and you can email us at waitingforwinterpodcast@gmail.com.
Oh, we have an email address. I didn't know we had an email address.
Yeah, actually, we have an official podcast email address, and that was it. So if you wanna get in touch with us, that's the way to do it, or on Facebook or Twitter.
Awesome.
So we cut to Castle Black, and Tyrion and the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, Jeor Mormont, are watching Sir Alistair Thorne train new recruits. Jeor Mormont, interestingly enough, is the father of Jorah Mormont, who has appeared already in the books as a companion for Daenerys Targaryen.
Yep.
And so Sir Alistair Thorne, the sort of the head trainer of the Night's Watch, is training the new recruits out in the courtyard, and Jon is displaying his clear superiority in the arena as by virtue of
having
the
had
fact,
some training.
yeah, having had some sword fighting training as opposed to having had none, like most of the other Night's Watch recruits.
Yep.
And this scene, I think, is actually where the title of this episode comes from. Sir Alistair mockingly refers to Jon as Lord Snow, meant to kind of call attention to the fact that he grew up a lot more comfortably than most people in Westeros grow up. So, if not necessarily in a position of privilege, but certainly much better circumstances than most of his new comrades. While this is happening, Commander Mormont shows Tyrion a letter from Winterfell, which is addressed to Jon and presumably contains the news that Bran has woken up. And when we cut to King's Landing, Grand Maester Pycelle delivers Ned what is presumably the same message from Winterfell. And when Pycelle leaves, Littlefinger comes in and tells Ned that Cat is in the city. So we go now to this Littlefinger and Ned going to the brothel where Cat is hiding, and naturally Ned gets a bit upset because he thinks the fact that Littlefinger has brought him to a brothel is some sort of joke.
Yeah.
Some sort of
It runs in family.
Disparaging comment against his wife, but and then Cat's head actually pops up over a balcony. So
Yep.
I kind of feel like this is the moment where Littlefinger cements his plan to betray Ned. I think maybe beforehand he was sort of on the fence about who to kind of back in terms of the upcoming political struggle, but at this moment he decides, you know what? Fuck you, Stark. You're dead now. So now, back in Castle Black, Jon's fellow recruits confront him in the armory about the resounding beating that he gave them while they were training. But Tyrion intercedes and encourages Jon to be kinder to his new comrades. And at that point, Tyrion also shows Jon the letter from Winterfell that Bran has woken up. So it's another nice little scene between Jon and Tyrion. So we cut back to King's Landing, and Littlefinger and Ned are discussing how to approach their investigation into all the things that are happening. Elsewhere in the Red Keep, Jaime visits Cersei in her room, and they talk about the fact that Bran is still alive and how to handle that, because by now news of the fact that Bran is still alive has presumably reached both their ears. The next morning, Ned and Cat part with a tender moment before the gates of the city, and I'd just like to remind our listeners that this is the last time that Ned and Cat ever see each other. Just a friendly reminder. Yeah. Just a friendly reminder.
Friendly reminder. Everybody dies.
Elsewhere in the Red Keep, Robert and the commander of the King's Guard, Sir Barristan Selmy, are swapping first kill stories, with a little bit of with an element of sort of talking about the history of the Baratheon rebellion thrown in there.
Yep.
Robert's squire Lancel Lannister, who is a cousin of Queen Cersei, reveals that there's no wine left in the room, which causes Robert to fly off the handle.
I love that phrase, fly off the handle.
Yeah.
It just...
It's appropriate, I think. So Robert calls in Jaime, who is standing guard outside, and Jamie joins the conversation about first kills. And Robert also asks Jamie about the Mad King and the night that Jamie killed him, which, I think this is like a conversation that you'd think they'd have at least have had before.
Before this point.
At least
I mean,
once.
it is exposition for the show, but
At least once in 15 years, you'd think that I've had that conversation.
yeah.
Yeah. We cut now to the Dothraki Sea, and Dany and Jorah having a bit of a talk about the way the Dothraki treat their slaves. Dany orders the Khalasar to stop for some... I'm not sure what her reason for ordering the Khalasar to stop is.
Because she can.
Yeah, it's kind of a display of power. Like,
that's it.
I think it's because it pisses Viserys off to no end. Like, he gets angry to the point of almost attacking Dany, and he has to be sort of physically restrained by one of Drogo's blood riders, which, yeah, I don't know. It's a moment of power grabbing from Dany, which seems to come out of nowhere, but I don't know. Maybe I
don't think it's power grabbing. It's just more exhibiting.
Yeah.
Just being like,
yeah,
well,
exhibiting is probably the better phrase.
Yeah. It's just like, oh, I can actually do this now.
And so Viserys orders Mormont to kill Rakaro, the Dothraki who restrained him, but Mormont refuses. And Viserys is not allowed to get back up on his horse, which is an act of extreme shame for the Dothraki. Like, if you're not allowed to ride a horse, then you are a lesser class of person if you can't ride a horse. So we cut back to Castle Black, and Jon takes a trip to the top of the wall where he finds Benjen, and Benjen tells Jon that he is going out ranging the next day, and sort of in a similar vein to Tyrion tells Jon to be kinder to his comrades in the Night's Watch. And Jon asks to go with him, but Jon's not ready for that, so Benjen just says no. And this is another moment where the two people who say that they will speak next time they see each other never see each other again.
Never see each other again.
So down in the dining hall at Castle Black, Yoren is telling Tyrion about the time that he ate a bear, which is an interesting story, to say the least. I think Yoren's in the middle of describing how best to fry up a bear's testicles, so, survival tips for those that need them.
Very much.
Benjen comes in, and he and Tyrion have a bit of an argument about the importance of the Night's Watch and what's really going on north of the Wall. Little moment of conflict where Benjen reveals that he might have seen some of the more mystical stuff that's going on out there, and that Tyrion should take this seriously.
Yep.
We cut to the Dothraki Sea. Dany's handmaids are teaching her to speak Dothraki, and Dany realizes that she is pregnant, or rather, one of the handmaids realizes that she is pregnant. And so
very exciting.
One of the handmaids, Eri, comes to find Jorah and Rakaro, who are just in another tent, having a very detailed discussion about swords. They're going over sort of pros and cons of Westerosi style long swords versus Dothraki araks, the curved swords that they use, and it's actually quite interesting from a purely sort of engineering standpoint.
Yeah.
And so upon hearing the news that Dany is pregnant, Jorah suddenly decides to ride to Cahor, one of the free cities in Essos, which is, a wee bit suspicious.
Do we ever find out why? I don't remember.
I think it's heavily implied that he went to inform Varys of Dany's pregnancy, because I think it's explicitly stated both in the show and the books that Jorah was Varys' source of information for Dany. So, yeah, I think that comes up again, if not in the next episode, but in an episode very soon coming up. So we cut back to Castle Black, and Jon is trying to give his fellow recruits a lesson in sword fighting. Sort of taking to heart both Tyrion and Benjen's words about helping his brothers rather than just beating them.
Yeah.
Also in the dining hall, Tyrion, Maester Aemon and Mormont are talking about the coming winter, the reports of the others and the other magical nonsense, and the rather sorry state of the Night's Watch. And both Mormont and Maester Aemon implore Tyrion to ask Cersei to send them some support, because they're in very dire need of it. And
they're in a pretty awful staffing situation at the moment with the quality of recruits they're getting, because they are supposed to be a military force, not a glorified prison.
Yeah, and it's been largely a lot more prisoners than volunteers in the last few years. So yeah, they're having problems finding quality people, and even with the prisoners, there's just aren't the numbers that they need. So it's a dire situation, definitely. We cut to the Dothraki Sea. Dany tells Drogo that she's pregnant, which is a nice scene. And then we cut back to Castle Black. Tyrion and Jon meet at the top of the wall. Tyrion says his goodbyes before he heads south again, and Jon asks Tyrion to look in on Bran for him. And then finally we cut back to King's Landing, and Arya meets her, quote, dancing master, one former First Sword of Bravos, Syrio Forel.
Syrio.
Yeah.
Favorite character.
Yeah, definitely one of the more memorable side characters in the series. And so they have a bit of a sparring session, and you can almost kind of hear Eye of the Tiger playing as the footage of Syrio and Arya fighting sort of cuts to credits. Like it's almost sort of like the start of a training montage, except it's not. And then spoiler alert, roll credits, episode's over. So another good episode of kind of setting things up and getting threads going.
Yeah, it's definitely, well, we've had some character development, especially with Targaryen
Dany
and Drogo. That relationship has progressed very quickly, which is good to see, because it's now gone from being real creepy to not being very creepy. So much more comfortable for everybody involved.
And I think in a nice little sort of parallel, Jon's kind of had a bit of development as well. Like he's had a bit of a reality check, which is I think is always important for a character growth.
Yeah.
Now we move on to the next episode that we're covering today, episode 4 of season 1, Cripples, Bastards and Broken Things.
Very good name.
Yeah. We open on Winterfell, and Bran has a dream about a crow with 3 eyes. And the first time that we see the mystical 3-eyed crow, who becomes very important to the mystical aspect of the plot.
It's the first time we've actually seen a magic thing. We've been hinted at magic things, but it's the first time there's actually been a magical thing.
Yeah, this is an explicit show of magic. So when Bran wakes up, Theon comes in to tell him that there are guests arriving in the castle, and he summons Hodor to carry Bran to the Great Hall to meet them. And in the hall we see that the guests arriving are actually Tyrion and Yoren, fresh down from the wall. And so Robb welcomes Yoren fairly warmly, because he's a man of the Night's Watch, and the Starks have a sort of a special connection to the Night's Watch. But he's less welcoming towards Tyrion, because of course he suspects that Tyrion might be one of the people who tried to kill
Bran,
his brother. But when Bran actually comes in, Tyrion shows Bran a design for a saddle, which would allow him to ride even without the use of his legs. So yeah, Robb I think immediately feels a bit sort of
chagrined.
Yeah, for behaving so aggressively toward Tyrion, and sort of relents a wee bit. But Tyrion's like, you know what? I don't care. I'm just going to go stay at the brothel outside the city, outside the castle rather, and we can all just be a bit more chill.
I won't get into your space, and then we won't get mad at each other.
So on his way back out of the castle, Theon bumps into Tyrion, or rather Tyrion bumps into Theon, and they exchange some tense words about why Theon is still at Winterfell and the whole issue of the Greyjoy rebellion in that context.
Yeah.
So we cut to Castle Black, and we meet Samwell Tarly for the first time as he is introduced to the other new recruits. And naturally, a lot of them are a bit sort of derisive about Sam because he's very fat, and Jon has to sort of intervene when Sir Alistair has another recruit try to beat Sam. And now we cut to Vaes Dothrak, and Drogo's Khalasar is arriving in the city, which is the kind of the de facto capital of the Dothraki nation. Like, in terms of like calling it a city, it's really more of an oversized village according to descriptions from the books, but a lot of the times it gets vastly expanded by the tents of Khalasars, and they're not allowed to fight each other while they're there, and it's a very sort of sacred place.
I feel like it's more the spiritual aspect is more important than their structures.
And there's an entranceway into the city called I think the Avenue of Stolen Gods.
Yeah.
Which is lined with statues of gods that the Dothraki have taken from people that they've conquered, which I think is just quite a cool world building detail in my mind. It's something I think is rather cool. So the Khalasar comes riding into Vaes Dothrak. Viserys is still bitter, and he's especially bitter about what he sees as Drogo riding the wrong way, because Vaes Dothrak is quite far to the east, away from the western coast and the narrow sea. So Viserys feels like, Drogo's going the wrong way.
Yeah.
And Dany and Jorah have a bit of a chat about Jorah's past and why he had to flee Westeros. That night in the city, Viserys is entertaining, quote, Dany's handmaid Doreah, and they have a bit of a chat about the rise and fall of House Targaryen.
Yep.
And the death of the dragons and the death of Viserys' father, the Mad King. And I just wanted to, this is me being nitpicky again, Viserys mentions that his father, the Mad King, would have him recite the names of all the dragons because the Targaryens used to have the dragon skulls lining the throne room when they ruled Westeros. And so Viserys used to walk along the line of the skulls and recite the names for his father. And a lot of the names he mentions are definitely not names that appear in the books.
I don't know why they would have changed that. Because they're not. No, you're right.
If you've read The World of Ice and Fire, one of the companion books for the series, there's a lot of information about the early Targaryens and their dragons in there, and none of the names that Viserys lists are names from that list.
Yeah.
So I think it might be because a lot of the dragons have names that don't sound mystical. Like a lot of them have names like Sunsmoke and Glitterwing and sort of names like that.
Sounds like some 13-year-old girl gave it to them.
Yeah, and I imagine in order to sort of maintain the kind of gritty adult atmosphere of the series, I think maybe the creators of the show made the names sound a bit more kind of fantasy-esque rather than sort of mundane. So
perhaps
might be an aesthetic choice. Who knows? So we cut to King's Landing, and Sansa and Septa Mordane are standing in the throne room discussing the future, like what will happen if Sansa becomes queen. And they have this moment where Sansa talks about, like, well, hypothetically, what happens if I don't bear Joffrey any sons and he only has daughters? Yeah. And I'm curious, this is something that I've asked some other people who are well versed in the book series, but I've never gotten a conclusive answer, whether or not the Targaryen succession principle applies to the new Baratheon dynasty, because the Targaryens quite early on adopted a zero tolerance policy towards women inheriting the Iron Throne.
Yeah.
So they had sort of instances where they could have gone between a male inheritor and a female inheritor, and they opted for the male inheritor almost every time. And the one time that there was a queen, a ruling queen, ended up being a bit of a disaster. So that there was a very ironclad no female rulers policy, and I wonder if it would apply to the Baratheons.
I mean, it's never explicitly mentioned that it does, but it's never explicitly
No.
mentioned that they would allow a female heir either. So,
But they say in the show that in this scene in particular that the throne would pass from Joffrey to Tommen if Sansa were to only have daughters.
yeah,
So-
which would be Mycella's in the middle there, right?
And it would skip over their sister Marcella.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting sort of just question of fact that if anybody has an answer, that email address waitingforwinterpodcast@gmail.com, please reach out to us if you have any insight into that.
Definitely.
At a small council meeting, the commander of the City Watch, Janos Slynt, is reporting on the upswing of violence in the city because of all the people that have been coming for the tournament. And Ned offers to give Janos 50 of his own household guard to help restore order. After the meeting ends, Ned questions Pycelle about Jon Arryn's death, sort of what happened to him, what Pycelle's opinion was as a quote-unquote medical professional, and Pycelle leads Ned back to his office where he shows Ned the book that Jon Arryn was very interested in shortly before he died, which is a genealogy of the greater and lesser houses.
Yeah.
And then elsewhere in the castle, Ned comes on Arya, who is practicing her balance by standing on one leg, and they have a bit of a chat about Bran's future, because of course Arya now knows that Bran is awake, and about Arya's own future. And there's this moment where Arya asks if she will one day be able to do all the same things that Bran can do, like, rule a holdfast or sit on the King's Council.
Yeah.
And Ned says, well, because you're a girl, you'll probably do all these other things that girls traditionally do in Westerosi society. And Arya says,
Why?
no, that's not me. I don't want to do those things. And it's, yeah. I mean, Ned's clearly sort of trying to be a good dad and
He's trying
and
to
sort of
he's trying to
be
justify
as
it.
supportive as he can be.
Justify it in
But-
a good way, but it's kind of hard to do.
I think especially because Ned's own sister Lyanna was so much like Arya in that sense that she kind of rejected this notion of her place as a woman in Westerosi society. And I imagine it's probably a little bit hard for him seeing that same thing, that same dichotomy play out in his daughter.
Yeah, and knowing what happened to her.
So we cut to Castle Black, and Sam joins Jon on the top of the wall, and Sam tells Jon that he is only joining the Night's Watch because his father is forcing him to.
Yeah.
His father, Lord Randall Tarly, has forced Sam to join the Night's Watch because he has a younger, more traditionally masculine son who he reckons would be a better heir to his land and title. And so Sam tells this rather horrible story about how his father said that if he didn't join the Night's Watch, then he would basically murder him and make it look like an accident. So
Yeah. Organize a
Although-
hunting expedition.
and somewhere in the woods you'll fall from your saddle and be left to die, which is it's pretty awful.
Yeah, there's not much you can do about
Although
that.
the tension for this scene for me was a little bit undercut by Jon delivering this line: "You can't fight, you can't see, you're afraid of heights and everything else." Like, was that meant to rhyme?
It seems
I
very
have-
strange that it does rhyme.
I
Yeah.
have so many questions about that line and no answers.
Yeah,
So
definitely not.
we cut back to King's Landing, and Ned and Littlefinger are having a chat about Ned's investigation. And Littlefinger, so they're wandering through like a sort of a courtyard the castle at this point, and Littlefinger points out the various spies that are eavesdropping on their conversation. Spies that belong in turn to Lord Varys, Queen Cersei, and himself.
Yeah.
And Littlefinger says to Ned that Jon Arryn would visit a particular smith in the city, a blacksmith, and so Ned kind of has the next clue for his investigation.
Yeah.
And I think this is the scene where Ned says, "Perhaps I was wrong to mistrust you." To which Littlefinger replies, "Mistrusting me was the smartest thing you did since you got off your horse."
Yeah, definitely.
Which, yeah, considering what happens later, yeah. Once again, little nitpick. There's a shot during their conversation where Aidan Gillen's lips aren't moving, or rather, Aidan Gillen's lips are moving, but Littlefinger isn't talking.
Yeah.
It's an over-the-shoulder shot of Ned, and you can see Aidan Gillen's mouth moving, like his chin is moving, but he's not talking. So it's, yeah, I'm just pointing out.
It's important.
Pointing out problems. So, at the site where they're going to have the tournament, out on the outskirts of the city, Jory Cassel has been sent to find Jon Arryn's former squire, Sir Hugh of the Vale, who, and this is how I've written it verbatim in my notes, is an insufferable little shit.
It's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, he basically tells Jory to fuck off because he's not a knight. I mean, to be fair though, Jory's about as close to a knight as you can get when you're a northerner, because the northerners don't engage in knighthood.
Do they?
No, because the knighthood's a very southern thing because it involves a lot of swearing to the seven gods, but I think the northerners sort of have the attitude of, can you sit on a horse and wear heavy armour and hold a lance when you ride into battle? Then that is your job. Like they don't really sort of
call you a knight.
Make a big thing out of it. In the city, Ned and Jory ride down the Street of Steel in search of the blacksmith, whose name doesn't get revealed in the show, but in the books is called Tobho Mott.
Yeah.
And is interestingly one of the few smiths in the world who can rework Valyrian steel. So
important.
Hang on to that little nugget of information for later. Mott tells Ned that Jon Arryn came only to see his assistant, a rather fine young gentleman called Gendry. And so this is where we see Gendry for the first time. And Ned, sort of on inspection of Gendry, very quickly deduces that Gendry is one of Robert's bastard sons.
Yeah.
And so back in the castle, Jaime is standing guard outside Robert's bedroom while Robert, how do I put this delicately, entertains some ladies.
Do they have vows in Westeros? Is that a thing?
They do, but people like Robert frequently violate them.
Yeah, I was about to say, violating his vows.
You see what I mean?
That's
his marriage vows,
yeah.
It's something that gets talked about quite a bit. There's one particular moment during the scene where from inside you can hear Robert shout, "Does it smell like blackberry jam?" Which is a line that haunts me.
I really don't want to know what that's about.
I lie awake at night and think about that.
It's probably
and my conclusions are not pretty.
Yeah, it's just probably just going to be like a yeast infection waiting to happen, is that quote.
Oh, Jesus.
Just no.
Oh, Christ. If anybody listening, if there's anybody still listening after that, I apologise most sincerely. So, yeah, Robert's entertaining some company. Jory arrives to deliver a message to Robert, but Robert's otherwise engaged, and Jaime doesn't want to be sort of the message holder. So they have a bit of a chat actually about the Greyjoy Rebellion, because apparently both Jaime and Jory were on the field in the Greyjoy Rebellion.
Yeah.
So we cut to Castle Black. Jon and his new recruit friends Pip and Gren have a bit of a chat about Sam and sort of what to do about him, because he's proved himself to be resoundingly sort of
unhelpful,
useless. And that night, Jon and his friends threaten one of the other new recruits, a guy called Holder, who has been sort of Alice's chosen whipping boy to beat up on Sam. They threaten him with harm if he doesn't lay off Sam, to the point that they have Ghost, John's direwolf, stand over him and growl menacingly, and it's all very sort of conspiracy thriller-esque.
Yep.
But the next morning it apparently works, because Halder and Grian refuse to seriously attack Sam, which makes Sir Alistair rather angry. And he makes a point about how, well, if an actual battle comes, do you really want this guy next to you?
Yeah. I mean, you can put him to work doing something else.
And yeah, they do that. So we cut to Vaes Dothrak, and Viserys is furious with Dany for a perceived slight, because Dany had a Dothraki-style vest made for him, and he was like, how dare you try to dress me like these savages? And it's like, dude, just chill out, for God's sake. And so when Viserys attacks Dany for another slight, because he says, next you'll want to braid my hair, and Dany says, well, you've won no victories.
You don't deserve a braid.
You don't get braids because you haven't won any victories. And so Viserys starts beating on her, and Dany shocks him by fighting back. I think she hits him with a belt or something, and kind of really startles him out of his torpor.
Go, Dany. Some self-confidence here.
Yeah. So we cut to Castle Black. Jon and Sam are talking about their love lives, or lack thereof, rather, because neither of them have ever actually been with a woman.
Yep.
And Jon talks about an incident where he almost did have sex with Roz, actually, the prostitute character who we've seen earlier in the series, but decided not to because he was afraid that he would father a bastard. And I think this is something that is part of Jon's character in the books, that he's kind of reluctant to engage in intimate relations because he is worried about bringing another bastard into the world, and he doesn't want to inflict that life on another human being. And it's all very kind of noble and disgustingly self-sacrificial. Yeah.
No, it's especially because he realizes that if he had a bastard, they would grow up in a worse situation than what he did, because he was apparently the bastard of Lord of Winterfell,
the acknowledged bastard of a powerful lord.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a fair enough problem, but learn to pull out, Jon. Come on. That's one of my favourite jokes, actually, is seeing someone with a large number of kids and being like, geez, learn to pull out every once in a while.
Pull out. Come on.
So, at that point, Sir Alistair comes into the room and gives them a sort of serious talking to about the coming winter. And just a point of clarification, I'm 90% sure that Sir Alistair confesses to committing cannibalism. Because he talks about how they had to eat the horses, and then kind of heavily alludes to that wasn't the only thing that they had to eat.
Yeah.
So, Sir Alistair cannibal confirmed? ?
Yes.
And
he didn't deny it.
Yeah. So we cut back to Vaes Dothrak at this point, and Dany is fretting about what happened with Viserys. And Jorah sort of gives Dany a bit of a reality check of her own when he says that the commoners don't care who the king is, and they have a very sort of candid moment where Dany says, "Well, maybe that's true, but I still want to go home." So yeah, and there's this great quote from Jorah in that scene where he says, "The common people pray for rain, health, and a summer that never ends. They don't care what games the High Lords play." So, yeah, it's a very, very poignant quote. I think especially for Dany. It informs a lot of her character later on.
And that's how she and she understands that in her later actions. I feel.
So we cut back to King's Landing. The tournament celebrating Ned's appointment as Hand has arrived, and has started, and Littlefinger is in the stands watching, and so are the Stark girls, and Littlefinger introduces himself to the Stark girls, sort of.
Yeah, because they've never actually met before, I don't think.
No, and I think we also kind of see the first hints at Littlefinger's obsession with Cat translating into an obsession with Sansa.
Because they look kind of the same. That's good enough, right?
And I think it's talked about in the books how Sansa is supposed to be like even prettier than Cat was when she was young. So
yeah,
I feel like
at least commit to a crush, Littlefinger.
Well, I mean, he committed to crushing on Cat for 15 years, so I don't know. I don't know that.
That's true.
I don't know that commitment's
That's
the
true.
problem. I think it's just obsession. So, this is another moment where I noticed that Aidan Gillen's mouth wasn't moving enough for his dialogue to be as loud as it was. Like, I realise that when they shoot outdoor scenes like that, they often have to redub over dialogue in recording booths later on. But it's just like very obvious in this moment. Normally, it's a lot less subtle. So
yeah, well.
Yeah, I'm just nitpicking.
They hadn't realised that they had a budget at this point.
Yeah, that's probably a good explanation. So the tournament starts, and the Mountain, Sir Gregor Clegane and Sir Hugh of the Vale are the first jousting match of the day, and I think this is the first time we see the Mountain.
Yep.
Who is enormous. Like, they call him...
Because we've met the Hound, but we haven't met the Mountain.
They call him the Mountain that rides. And it's an accurate description, I would say. And it's funny, because...
that horse, though.
Yeah, that poor horse. They change actors for the Mountain between season 3 and 4, I think. And if I remember correctly, the first guy who played him was like 7 foot something, but the second guy that played him was closer to like 8 feet, so I'm surprised they were able to upgrade in that instance.
Yeah, just like move different person but better.
So yes, the Mountain and Sir Hugh are the first joust of the day, and when they pass at each other, the Mountain kills Sir Hugh, like a shard of his lance embeds itself in his throat, and he dies right there on the field in front of everybody. Which, and the timing of which kind of gets questioned later on in the series, as like, well, Sir Hugh was the closest to Jon Arryn that is still in King's Landing, and now he's dead, so, you know, anybody else think this is suspicious? And so, also at this point, Littlefinger tells the story of what happened to the Hound's face, why it's all burnt. Specifically, that the Mountain did it. That he, the Mountain came on the Hound, playing with one of the Mountain's toys when they were children, and just pushed him in the fire and held him there. So it's rather horrific, actually.
I mean, it sets the tone well, I feel.
It definitely does.
For the rest of for the level of violence that we're going to experience.
So in the castle, Cersei comes to visit Ned, and they have a bit of a chat about what happened in Derry. And Cersei is she's kind of being a bit sort of reconciliatory at this point. Like, she's trying to mend the bridge a wee bit. I don't think she's trying to do it as like a genuine attempt to connect with Ned. I think she's just trying to get some of the heat off her and Jaime.
Yeah.
And
because like they're already under, well, not suspicion, but they're already nervous about Bran as well. So.
And they have this exchange. Your brother was trained to lead, and you were trained to follow. I was also trained to kill my enemies, Your Grace, as was I. So it's yeah. I don't know what that means, but it sounds cool.
Sounds cool. It sounds very threatening. Still, as you say, I'm not sure what it actually means.
So we cut to the inn at the crossroads. Like, that's not the description of it. That's like its actual name, the Crossroads Inn. And
Yep.
Tyrion arrives at the inn on his way south, but Cat and Roderick Cassel happen to be there also on their way back north. And we have one of my favourite scenes in this season, at least, where Tyrion comes in and Roderick and Cat try to make themselves scarce, but Tyrion recognises them, and so Cat kind of gets to her feet and says, "Well, I was very young when last I stayed in this inn," and starts pointing out all the assembled soldiers who come from various Riverlands houses, all of whom are loyal to Cat's father, Lord Hoster Tully. So that you've got some soldiers from House Went and House Bracken and House Frey. And Tyrion's like, well, alright, very impressive that there are all these soldiers that work for your dad here, but I don't get why you're pointing this out. And so Cat says, "In the name of the good lords you serve and our beloved King Robert, I command you to seize this man who stole into my home and attempted to murder my son. Seize him and bring him to Winterfell, where he can await the king's justice." And it's such a cool scene and a cool moment for Catelyn. Translated almost
Awful
literally.
moment for
Translated almost literally
the
from
plot.
the books. I mean,
Yeah.
it does kind of kick off the Stark Lannister conflict, as we will see in the next episode. But it's a kick-ass scene. And there's
It is very good.
And there's a great line from the books, if I recall. Cat didn't know what was more satisfying, the sound of the drawn swords or the look of stunned disbelief on Tyrion Lannister's face. And so that episode, that little bit marks the end of the episode, and we roll credits.
There we go.
Yeah. So yeah,
We have some plot progression.
Got some big developments happening. Not so much on the mystical side, but certainly very much on the political side. So, and those definitely really come to a head in the next couple of episodes. So, thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Waiting for Winter podcast. Be more consistent with your accents.